we are here with Schyken. I will endeavor to let him explain that one. Schyken, you provide Linux content on YouTube. Can you explain what kind of content you actually make?
That is an interesting question. So I typically lean towards the distribution overview side of things. I find systems that I typically tend to like, and I try and point out some things that I really like about them. A lot of it is surface level, but when I do get the chance, I'll talk about some of the lower level stuff. I don't do very many tutorials. It's definitely a come look at this. This is what I like, and this is what I don't like. But I always invite people to check things out for themselves because that is the best way anyone's ever going to get a feel for what works for them. Beyond that, I do some gameplay videos. Everything's done on Linux with the exception of 2 videos that were done for Linux, but not on Linux. So.
Ooh, bad.
Yeah, I know,
How
right?
dare you actually use other operating systems to have a valid opinion on things? That is just completely wrong. Shame. Well, we can get into that if you want. I believe I said turncoat.
Turncoat, there we go.
But no, I find your content actually really good. Why do you call them overviews as opposed to reviews, which I find a lot of people actually do on YouTube when it's just kind of like they fire up a VM and it's not real metal?
So the reason I avoid the term review is because I don't tend to offer reviews. I'm not spending, for the most part, a significant enough of time making that system a part of my daily life to where I can just go out at any point and provide a full in-depth coverage of this to someone and call it a review. There's no way I can justify me taking a look at something and pointing out what I like about it as a review. It's not objective. It's certainly not full coverage, and it doesn't allow the viewer to get a full understanding of what they would expect from something like a review. It's definitely limited, so I don't feel comfortable calling it a review because there are people who do great reviews and spend significant amount of their time with a specific project to work on that, and they definitely deserve that credit.
So in other words, you have what people on Destination Linux would call the distro hopperitis, I believe it is what they call it. I think you'd probably lead the pack with Rocco on that.
It's kind of terrifying because they're the reason I started.
I thought it was. Then you have Ryan, but I'll get into Ryan at some point. No, I found that take actually kind of refreshing because from what it sounded like for you, in order to actually fully do something as a review, you would have to almost, from at least what I'm hearing, is you have the mentality of you have to make it almost a daily driver substitute.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think is a fair assessment of how you actually do a review, because I think, like you said, the only thing I will say is for me, reviews are subjectivity in the guise of objectivity. At the end of the day, reviews an opinion.
Oh yeah,
you really can't be objective. You can give factual objectives to what you do and do not like. But no. So what kind of so you've done video games? What kind of games are there, Schyken?
Ones that I'm not good at and one that I'm great at.
Please elaborate.
Well, I'm terrible at any FPS ever, apparently. So CSGO, I just get slaughtered constantly. But play a lot of Minecraft. It's the best game under the sun. So there you go.
It's because you can build stuff and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, there you go. Everything's your own, right?
Exactly. As an FPS challenge, I believe Ryan would probably challenge you to ballistic overkill.
Oh
Uh,
gosh.
I'm gonna give you one better that actually has bots that you can play with, so you don't die and you don't get embarrassed online.
I like
Um,
this idea.
is one called Interstellar Marines,
Okay.
and it'll be called an early access game. It's somewhere in between, like full release. Well, what happened is basically the dev team ran out of money and went from a dev team to one guy.
Ooh, ouch.
But the game still gets updates like on every couple of months, so it's still kicking. And I still find it fun, and it's a great game, and it's really cheap. I think it's like $5, $10, somewhere in that neighborhood. So,
That's not bad actually. I'll make sure to give that a try.
so what makes you so bad at FPSs?
You know what? I really don't know. I'd figure I'd be great at it, as it's difficult to to even consider. I wouldn't be good at it. I don't know. I think a lot of it has to do with I'm a very casual player. It's hard for me to take stuff like that seriously. You know, I jump in and I'm just like, oh, cool. What does this little shooty thing do? And you know, I get shot.
Um, well, okay. So, how long have I probably should have asked this earlier? How long have you actually been using Linux?
I've been using Linux for about a little under 2.5 years now, since about the 1604 release.
Wow. So
Yeah.
relatively new. Yeah, you were one of these that jump into the let's see what DistroWatch has new mentality.
You know what? I'm still there.
What I'm curious. See, I've kind of mellowed out on my like people who don't know. I've been doing Linux since like '99. So like my whole like I might jump around from distro to distro, but I like I've heard you use Fedora. I usually rag on Fedora because it's RPM because I have a bad because back in the day RPM was bad.
It was pretty rough. I hear.
So if you remember DLL dependency hell in Windows, think that, but with Linux.
Sounds about right.
Um, so what made you actually look at Linux as a I don't know primary like second like how do you use Linux? Like I guess that's two questions in one, but
well, I guess I could kind of start with how I got into it, and that's kind of a fun story. I had this little HP 2000 notebook. It's obviously, you know,
AMD like E 300 450
dual core
fusion processor.
Yeah, so that's fun. And obviously, when you put something like Windows on it, it's an absolute joke. But, I was thinking, well, there's got to be something I could possibly do. And the first thing I did was look for an alternative. My initial thought was it needed to be lightweight. And later I found out that it's not that it needs to be lightweight, it just needs to be efficient and handle its resources properly. So the very first thing I landed on was Ubuntu, and that was 1604. I threw it on there, completely wiping my only my only machine, and jumping straight in. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, and there was no turning back. So my next, within the span of 6 hours, I distro hopped quite a few times. I went from Ubuntu to Ubuntu, and Ubuntu was definitely not for me at the time, at least not on that machine. I don't know. Went to Linux Mint, tried a few different flavors from them. I tried some KDE distros, and at the time I really hated KDE. Just don't know why. Just felt uncomfortable to use. And yeah. I guess there was just, especially compared to Windows, there was just so much in every little corner that it was overwhelming and too much. So I landed on Linux Mint. I used that for about 10 months as my main driver while I played with other systems on the side. So,
Nice.
yeah.
I always love hearing how people get into it because, like, with like Das Geek, who I'll eventually be interviewing when he gets a chance. We saw his journey to Linux land with his 30 days of Linux challenge or whatever it was.
Sounds wonderful.
Kind of what you did, though. Really, you just take the plunge.
Yeah.
Um, so, as someone who just kind of, you were looking for alternatives. 1604, which is redundantly because that's what I'm using to record this video. But I definitely understand where you're coming from. Like, Linux is great for the quote unquote aging hardware, which,
Yeah.
Windows has its problems. Don't get me wrong. It has its pros and cons, just like every OS. But I think the thing, like in that particular machine's case, because I just updated one not that long ago to what was that run? I think I put Kubuntu on it, the 1804 release.
Nice.
I think I had 8 gigs of RAM. Was it 8 gigs of RAM and a 320 gig, like 7200, just regular drive. And that was running the 1.4 dual core that you were just talking about.
Nice. Yeah.
And it actually ran really well. And I tried a few other distros, not so much. So I think that's Linux's strength, is actually being able to play kind of to the hardware.
Yeah. It definitely I think a lot of it is dependent on, how things are handled, what it supports, and how well it supports it. Whereas Windows is just kind of like taking a large bucket of paint and throwing it on the canvas and hoping you get something.
Hoping you still see out the window.
There you go.
So you said you ran that for about 10 months.
Yeah.
So where do you go after that then?
That is an interesting question. I got less and less into Linux Mint because there were a few problems I had with it that just didn't make it as suitable for me. Things that I just weren't happy with. So I decided, since I've been trying other systems, it's probably a good idea to, make them a more critical part of my life. I've been watching, Destination Linux videos and, Rocco and Rob's tutorials and reviews or things like that. And I thought, I can give this a go. So after Linux Mint, I went to Manjaro for a while. And that was a fairly good experience. It served me for about 6 months. I had never used an Arch-based distro before, so I got incredibly lucky because I later found out how volatile that is.
Breakage much?
Yeah. But I typically tended to stay within the Ubuntu family for most of the time because I was familiar with how they worked, but I also tended to like the way they worked and the software availability. So that's what I stuck with.
So the question becomes, what do you use now?
Currently, I'm running Elementary OS. That's probably not a surprise to a lot of people. I don't develop Elementary OS. I know some people were confused. But I would be open to taking a spokesperson position, certainly.
Community manager?
Yeah, there you go. But no, I'm using Elementary OS. This is 0.4.1, the Loki release on 1604. And it's not only just for me. My mom seems to like it as well. My girlfriend likes it. And I like the way they've done the App Center. I like the way they still rely on the Ubuntu base, which gives me a lot of benefits behind the scenes, like using the Kubuntu backports, which is obviously a risky and kind of crazy thing to do, but it works. So
Hey,
yeah.
some of those KDE apps for all their configurations are still really needed.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
with you. Yeah, hello, Katie and Live.
Yeah, Caden Live is a big one. I never realized how much it relied on though. When I put in that PPA and I updated, I was like, oh,
You basically pull down like the entire desktop environment.
yeah, it was crazy. I was like, all the numbers flying by so fast, different packages. I was like, okay, that's nice.
So that you just brought up an interesting point. Then you said your mom and your girlfriend both use elementary.
Yeah.
How has that transition for someone who doesn't necessarily jive in the same way of technology you do, if you understand what I mean, as far as
That
just kind of,
is a good question. Um, so previously, my mother and my girlfriend were Windows users. Um, Windows 7 was what they typically used, and then when Windows 10 came out, things were bad at first, but then they got better. But I didn't even really ask. I just kind of changed everything overnight, and then when they all woke up, it was different. So I just
you did the one thing every Linux user tells you not to do.
yes, and it was wonderful. So I think what a lot of people fail to realize is that it's not a good thing to do in most cases. If you can absolutely 100% provide everything that the user would need and make it easily accessible and be there to explain, help, and support any question they may or may not have, like then I think is the only time you should even consider something like that. Um, but it was fairly easy. We didn't start with that. We started with Mint, and it was a traditional kind of familiar Windows-like layout. And I set up the applications. I set up Firefox sync, so all our bookmarks would come down and everything like that. And it went fairly well. It wasn't too difficult. I was always able to find alternatives for any softwares they were looking for. Like my mom plays a lot of solitaire, um, so that was great. And eventually, the to elementary was super super easy. Um, it's just a clean and simple desktop experience. Even though it looks a little different, I think it does a fairly good job at kind of presenting itself as what you see is what's going to happen. It doesn't kind of have hidden function, if that makes sense. You know,
Mhm.
what you see is what you get.
So, what really drew you? As I'm always curious, what actually drew you to elementary?
That is a good question as well. I actually didn't like elementary so much, and a lot of that was due to I was just not familiar with it. It felt kind of alien to me. I saw it and I was like, "Oh, well, this looks kind of cool, but I mean, it's a fun toy." But yeah, I know. Funny me saying that, right? But I ended up going back to it. I was wanted to, check it out. I like giving things a second chance, a third chance, or as much as I distro hop, a 17th chance.
You hop like 17 times in a day.
Yeah, it's a problem. I should seek help.
Distro hoppers anonymous.
There we go.
But
But
anyway,
yeah, I loved not necessarily the simplicity of it. A lot of it was just the straightforwardness of it, the way it appeared. While yes, simplistic was, I think a lot of it was that it was clean. It was nicely presented. It had its own apps that did basic functions, but there were still other apps developed in similar ways that followed similar guidelines available in their store. So I think one of the big things is the ecosystem, in that things aren't drastically different from one another, just because a different developer made it. You still have these guidelines, these kind of uh, principles that allow things to be familiar even if you've never used it.
Mhm. I have to say, though, those are some interesting reasons. I mean, for those that don't know, I do rag on elementary, but I do love a lot of the aesthetic work, the design aspects of elementary. My personally, for me, my biggest gripe is just you have to rethink your brain a little bit on how you do stuff, workflow wise. And there's no dark mode, which yes, I know you can do it
in the name.
third party application, yada yada. But there's no. It's not as simple as like on YouTube where it's night mode and it becomes a dark theme. That is really what those are like the two biggest hangups I have. And my brain is wired in one way, and like trying to rework it just doesn't work.
I'm still getting used to it.
But you mentioned the App Center.
Yeah.
What is it about the App Center that you like compared to, say, was it Gnome Software or Discovery or any of that? Because
could you even mention those abominable?
I use Synaptic.
Okay. Well, that would.
That's how.
Quite a few reasons. I know this sounds dumb, but one, it's pretty.
For some people, aesthetics matter.
But another reason is definitely the pay what you want aspect of it.
Okay.
I absolutely love the ability to easily support developers, but not be restricted, say, if that's not an option. I love being able to try something before I buy it. So that's one benefit it adds. But I also like the ability to go back at any time and just say, hey, this is great stuff. I'm going to go ahead and, donate straight from where I get the software, which is a wonderful thing to do. So I think it benefits both people who, say, aren't financially capable of doing so, or maybe not of age to do so, but still like the software and want to use it. They're not restricted in that sense. But it also allows people who are capable and wanting to do so to be able to put that forward.
I'm definitely understand where you're coming from there. You bring up an interesting conundrum of the whole pay for software thing.
Yeah.
Do know I actually do pay for software, as you should, if you end up finding a continuous use for it. FYI, Linux users, you talk about freedom but don't want to pay for anything.
It's fascinating.
It's freedom as long as it's free as in beer and free as in freedom. But I definitely appreciate what they're trying to do. Actually,
it's
one
hard.
of my I can only imagine how hard it is for them with all the stuff they're trying to do. Actually, funny enough, one of my favorite applications that I use is actually designed for elementary, and actually I have it installed on this machine. I think I had to install it as a flat pack.
Probably. I think I've seen it in the Flatpak store.
Is called Vocal, which is a great looking podcast and for audio and video that you can potentially find on Linux. Because I'm sorry, GPotter looks like GeoCities from 1999. It's functional. It just don't look all that pretty. But I definitely can love what elementary does. So my question to you is, as a Linux user, relatively new, but you kind of jumped in on the deep end.
I always do things the hard way, It's just
it's the only way you learn and get experience really quick, though. So how has your family made that transition? I mean, you had mentioned that they had made it pretty easily, but were there any bumps along the way that
yeah, certainly. I definitely had a lot to do with that because I ended up having to be the tech support. That's what I signed on for. I certainly had no intention of leaving them in high waters. So little things typically were getting backup stuff set up, making sure that file syncs for like, financial documentation, stuff like that. All of that was present, available, and where it should be. Especially because I distro hop a lot and I'm dumb enough to do that on the main machine. Um, a
Ouch.
lot of yeah, a lot of it comes into play when making sure that everything that was present before is still present and available afterwards, no matter what I'm using. And that includes, files themselves in the proper folders, including previews in the file manager, but also all of the applications, which can be challenging with certain distros because sometimes that's not available or it takes additional steps to do. But a lot of it is more or less me setting up absolutely everything over like a 1 hour span to make sure they don't have to do that, because at any point when I've more or less removed something, obviously I'm creating an additional and unnecessary challenge for another user. And that has happened a couple times, typically because I forget something. And so a lot of it is just things need to remain constant, but more so things need to remain available.
Okay, fair enough. Because I know we hear, oh, I made this person switch to Linux. No, did you? You don't actually hear the details of how they,
Yeah.
pros and cons. So as
it definitely takes time.
Oh, I completely hear that. So as a Linux specifically YouTuber, how have you found the response to some of your content?
Surprisingly, it's been extremely positive, which surprised me. I guess I said surprisingly twice there. But I've actually done YouTube a couple times in the past. And at the time, it was more of, I just liked YouTube as a platform, wanted to share stuff, and it was kind of weird, but I've deleted my channel and recreated it like 7 times. So when I landed on Linux, it wasn't about, hey, I can make videos. The thing that got me into YouTube was, man, I can share what I'm experiencing. I can take part in a community, and even if I don't have much to give via code, and don't know exactly who and what to support, because sometimes choosing someone to support is kind of difficult because there's so many good options. I can certainly partake in community benefit. My hopes are always that the things that I do will somehow benefit someone else, whether they learn something from it or whether they just find it interesting and want to try it for themselves. That's always my goal, is to share what I've done, what I've found, and make sure that others are able to access those experiences themselves.
Nice. Because like I said, your content's definitely different. It's not the same as a lot of other content that you'll find as far as it relates to Linux. Like you said, it's more high view. Like it does. Like you look at some of the overviews or other reviews or etc. It kind of gets into like, this is how you configure XFCE. This is go 50 or go 15 layers into KDE to find this one thing that does this.
Yeah.
Yours is not that, but it's refreshing because it takes it. I don't want to say to the end user level, but it comes across as, these are the cool things that it can do, and you can be productive on. FYI, I'm doing this on a Linux machine, by the way, ironically. I find that type of content refreshing because, if anybody who watches this channel, not safe for work is usually my my MO. And I watch a lot of Linux videos because I do reaction videos to Linux videos. And sometimes they are really, really, really dumb. So when I see like legit good content, like I've seen the bottom of the barrel cesspool essentially when it comes to Linux videos.
Terrifying.
This is what you blaringly bad music in the terminal, and they type what they're saying, what they would be saying in the terminal. That kind of quality, and it's done with GTK Record My Desktop, which is utter garbage of an application.
Pretty rough.
So when I look at when you really started getting back into doing content, apparently, I liked the content that you were doing, even though, yeah, I do poke fun at your gameplay.
It's hard not to.
It's always all in good fun, but I think we need that kind of content where it's more. It's not developer talk. It's not. It gets outside the echo chamber of Linux. And I think those high overview type of looks at distributions and like what they can and can't do and what makes them different, and kind of like just looking at the core and the different things that make it what it is, without getting into like all the like, oh well, this uses the GTK and this uses Qt and this uses EFL or whatever. I find that we need more of that content, and we don't get a lot of it. We get a lot of echo chamber type of content, which is good and bad. It definitely has an audience to cater to. But when your content is as accessible so that everybody can understand it and where they're coming from, if they have a passing interest, not just in Linux, but in technology or operating systems or software, you expand that reach of an audience. And I think that's really cool. And that's what I really like about your content, is that it has that expansion of audience, that it doesn't just focus on like, oh, this is Linux specific software. It's like, no, like Joe Schmo can look at this and be like, oh, this is pretty cool software from like Windows or Mac or whatever. And that is definitely something that I really do appreciate about what you do for content. And so as a Linux YouTuber, though, what have you found has been the hardest thing?
About the YouTubing part or about the Linux part?
Both.
That is a good question. Well, about the YouTubing part, not too much. I definitely think that it's easy to just pump out videos. A lot of people have the misconception that it's not that content itself is hard to make. It's good content that's hard to make. Mm-hmm. And I certainly won't say that my content is great, or I hope, it's in my belief that at the least it's good, and my goal is to always improve that. Mm-hmm. But I certainly think that one of the biggest things is that it takes a little more than just wanting to make videos. It takes an interest in what you're talking about, who you're sharing it with, and your overall goal. I think where a lot of people fall down is that they're interested in some kind of short-term turnaround profit or something like that, or they're not quite as interested in what they're talking about as they are the interactions they get from it. I think that one of the challenges has been trying to find a balance for me, because it takes a lot of time in terms of trying to do the best I can possibly do with it and make sure it's not overwhelming for me or the people watching. So that has been difficult. Software availability has been fine. I mean, I still think Kden Live is just about the best thing on Linux ever. And
well, what about OBS?
OBS, yeah, I guess it does make it all possible, doesn't it?
Kind of need one and the other to make it both work.
I think Kden Live does do screen capture, funny enough, but I have never used it.
I have had mixed results, because it can also directly capture from the webcam too.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Um, yeah, it's interesting if you do like vlogs and stuff, but I've never had great luck with that particular aspect of it. Um, but no, so what has been the biggest problem that you have encountered, not just on the YouTube end of things, but potentially on the Linux side of things?
Uh,
And I got a distinct feeling where I had this might go.
yeah, you already know where it's going. But I'll start off with something um, kind of specific. It's really unfortunate because it's one of the best things about Linux, but it's also one of the worst things about Linux, and that's community. It's very hard to remain in a position where you're open to everything when there's so much negativity. It's hard to hear the good things through all the bad. I've unfortunately been a suspect of stuff like that in the past. I've been negative about things, and I've just been what I would honestly say a horrible person. And I don't want that. It's certainly something that I've struggled with, so I certainly don't want that for others. I don't want to be the voice of negativity and FUD in other people's ears, and I certainly hope that other people feel the same way, and that they you know wouldn't like to make sure every project that isn't theirs burns down to the ground.
That almost sounds like a shot at me, maybe.
No, what?
I might troll, but sometimes I get trolled by other people.
Yeah, no, but you definitely do a great job at remaining what I'd consider realistic, and that's what I definitely love about your content is that you voice yourself, you say, um, I mean, you just call it like it is, and that's honestly something we need more of. That's definitely a wonderful quality, and you know it's refreshing.
Yes, sometimes the Linus Torvalds approach is the only way for stuff to work. Hi, NVIDIA. I'm doing advertiser friendly.
That's difficult.
In my case, yes. But so besides the community, so that can tie more into YouTube specific.
That's certainly not tied to Linux as a whole.
What would you say Linux from a technical point of view makes being a YouTuber hard?
That is a good question. And funny enough, it also ties into everything about my personal life, and that's flexibility for end users in terms of shared experiences. And I'm not talking about convergence. I'm talking about integration between platforms such as your phone, your desktop. But it also ties into not just, hey, your phone can talk to your computer, but it also ties into, hey, this service, whatever social service it is, can talk to your computer or your phone in the same exact way on both sides. So YouTube in particular, say I get a comment on a video. I always check my phone for that because I don't get notifications. There's no desktop YouTube app, or there's no application that's going to handle something like that. So it has to be done on my phone. But on the other hand, when I've got something on my desktop, I certainly want to be able to access it from my phone if I'm not at my desktop, or vice versa. So that's one of the largest challenges, is that I'm typically an active person online. And while it's not impossible to maintain that, it's certainly a lot easier than it once was. There are a lot of restrictions I've found with accessing third-party, typically proprietary, privacy-invading monster services.
Which ironically is owned by, yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. It has been a bit challenging because I've had to find workarounds of sorts, and it's not enjoyable or as straightforward as I believe it should be.
How would you in the time you've been on Linux, video production, how would you say that has come along, even in say the last 2.5 years? that you've been using it?
Well, I mean, it's great. Certainly, I mean, when I was using Windows, I used this application called Cine. No, it was. Oh gosh, I don't even remember what it's called now. It was so long. Camtasia. There we go.
Like a
And
$400 program.
yeah, it's pretty expensive. I always use the trial and then just change the date on my computer before I launched it.
There you
That's
go.
super illegal, by the way, but you know what? No, I video production on Linux has been a pleasure. I've ran into a hurdle every now and then where it's mostly just hardware encoding, decoding type stuff. You know, like there's a driver on Windows that just isn't there on Linux, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work. I still, to this day, haven't found one. A device that was running that wouldn't handle those kind of things, you know, with the exception of it just being underpowered. Um, you know, this video production has been great because we have assets like Kden Live and Kden Live to edit these. these
Do note there are other options. Your mileage may vary.
yeah. But no, it's definitely been wonderful. I mean, the longest thing is rendering, to be honest. Once you're settled down, you're recording, you know what you want to talk about, and you get that done, you know, you make a final product and you just wait for the cake to bake. So, yeah, make sure you get a lot of cores and a lot of threads.
Yup, and a really fast SSD. Makes that render time a whole lot less of a pain. So yeah,
it definitely helps.
I was going to say you would know best. I mean, from the sounds of it, you have fluctuated in your level of hardware from, I don't want to call it low end, shall we say, to wherever you're at now, which is, I believe, is a Ryzen something something.
I'm using an R5 1600. Yeah, I've now got 32 gigs of RAM, so I'm super happy.
Nice.
Took me a while.
So with that is really all I had to ask.
Awesome.
So what is the one piece of advice that you would give to anybody that is potentially interested in Linux? Disregard the YouTube part, just Linux.
Potential. There's plenty of potential, and that you know, what you see isn't always the end of the road, because it's such a large set of unique people developing various different systems, softwares, experiences, TM. It's certainly something that's got potential, not just, you know, as a platform, but as a solution for you. And it's more than meets the eye.
All right. So potential. Interesting. And with that is all I got. Thank you for joining. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And I can't wait for more content from you, bud. So